question, right?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is, as always, an honour to be able to stand in this place and talk about the issues that are so important to Canadians. But, Madam Speaker, if I could, just for a brief moment, talk about something that is so important, and that is today being the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the Battle of Normandy. And specifically to note, Madam Speaker, that in terms of an anniversary, a milestone anniversary, there's only a few of those brave men and women, those men who marched those beaches back 80 years ago today, that are still surviving. And to note how important of a defining moment this was in the fight for freedom, how that battle turned the tide in World War II, breaking through the Nazi, what was seen to be an impenetrable Nazi beach. And it was Canadians that led the way on Juno Beach. And, Madam Speaker, I stand here today to pay tribute to those men who defied the odds, and truly the so many that made the ultimate sacrifice. So thank you, and to acknowledge the 80th anniversary of D-Day here today. Thank you. Now, Madam Speaker, the motion that we have before us is an important one. It speaks to the very fundamental principles of accountability that Parliament should be seized with. So let's unpack a little bit about what we are requesting. Parliament is asking, through this Opposition Day motion, a motion the Conservatives have brought forward, common sense Conservatives are simply saying it's time to get answers on some very serious, outstanding questions about the actions that have been taken at Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. What is the Liberals will say an arm's length development fund to support green tech, clean tech investments. But, Madam Speaker, here's where the problem is. While the Liberals are quick to say that it's an arm's length organization that made its own decisions, let me highlight for Canadians a very, very important fact. It is a entity that is still accountable to a minister. That is a fact. And, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the President and the chair of that entity, it is an appointment made by the Prime Minister, of which we see stacked with Liberal friends and allies. So what ended up happening over the course of the last 9 or so years is we see a increasing trend of where Liberal insiders getting appointed to these high-profile positions that were making decisions that led to Liberals getting rich. That's truly what it came down to. And in the recent Auditor General report that was released, we see some incredibly troubling allegations. As a member of the Ethics Committee and as somebody who has watched carefully the development of some of these things, as we've been clawing for answers, trying to get the most basic answers from this government so that Canadians can see where the money went. And it's not government's money. I think that's something that's so often forgotten about. It is not government's money that's being spent, government's money that's being wasted, government's money that is going to make liberal insiders rich. No, Madam Speaker. It is the hard-earned dollars of Canadians that is collected in taxes by the government. And for Canadians to look and see millions upon millions of dollars being misappropriated, conflicts of interest that are truly an embarrassment to what is supposed to be the most basic level of accountability. So, Madam Speaker, what are we asking? Well, we're asking for all of the documents to be handed over so that Canadians can ultimately get answers, and a timeline on that of 14 days. It's simple, it's common sense. So we've introduced this motion that is to try to bring forward that accountability. But let me highlight for a moment, if I could, Madam Speaker, what the Auditor General found that is so troubling at SDTC, the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. We have 90 cases where the conflict of interest rules and policies were not followed. 90 cases. We're not talking about 1 or 2 mistakes. We're talking about 90 cases where conflict of interest policies were not followed. There was $76 million on projects connected to Liberals' friends appointed to run the SDTC. $76 million. That is more money than most Canadians could ever dream of seeing. Further, he spends $59 million on projects that were not allowed to have been awarded any money. So again, we're not talking about just conflict of interest. Maybe somebody called somebody or whatever the case is, but Madam Speaker, $59 million spent on projects that were not even allowed to have been awarded any money. And $12 million on projects that were both a conflict of interest and ineligible for funding. It is absolutely astounding. And Madam Speaker, there is an instance that we saw and have had a chance to talk a little bit about this at the Ethics Committee, but where the hand-picked chair, the Prime Minister's hand-picked chair, awarded herself, her company, the company that she was a principal of, $217,000. Can you believe that? $217,000 was given to the chair of SDTC. So when we talk about it being this green, liberal green slush fund, Madam Speaker, it truly is just that, because you see an entity that has that in dozens and dozens of cases with more than $100 million, we see that dollars went, hard-earned taxpayers' money that was paid to government through taxes, was paid to Liberal insiders. Now, Madam Speaker, the response has been thus far, the ministers stand up and say, don't worry, we solved the problem. We're folding it into the ministry. Don't worry about it. There's nothing to see here. Well, Madam Speaker, we have seen time and time again that Liberals simply cannot be trusted when it comes to accountability, when it is their management of this organization that led to the disaster that we have before us. Madam Speaker, it needs to, and it is hard to believe that in the context of where we are today that this even needs to be said, but no one in Canada is above the law. And I know there's a host of issues that Canadians are being faced with, and between the crime and chaos in our streets, out of control inflation, and all of these other things, there seems to be not even just a new scandal every day, but it seems that there are multiple scandals that break each and every day in this country where the Prime Minister is at the center of, or certainly his hands and his top people are involved. But Madam Speaker, it needs to be said that no one is above the law, and we need to make sure that we are getting answers for Canadians. Madam Speaker, when it comes to the role that this place plays, document production, and the requirement that the Liberals understand, and I encourage the Liberals, especially those in the Liberal backbench, to not forget the simple fact. Parliament is the supreme lawmaking authority of the land. It is not the Prime Minister's office, it is not the Cabinet, it is Parliament itself, so they have a very, very clear choice on this matter. Madam Speaker, that is why common sense Conservatives have made it so clear that we have to get to the bottom of this. We have to get the answers that Canadians ultimately deserve, and that is why we have brought forward the motion here today. And whether the Liberals like it or not, this is an inconvenient and uncomfortable thing for the Liberal NDP coalition here, because it is talking about millions of dollars that have been wasted going to their friends, but it is fundamental for the future functioning of our democratic system that we get those answers. So, Madam Speaker, the last thing I would say in the conclusion of my speech is that we have ourselves, while the NDP are quick to prop up the Liberals at every turn, including covering up their scandals, there is a very clear option that the Liberal backbench, that the NDP as the fourth party, and the Bloc Québécois as the third party have. They can join with Conservatives, these members of Parliament, not as particular members of a party, but as members of Parliament who are here to first serve the best interests of Canadians. They can stand up and say enough is enough. It is time to get answers. A basic level of accountability is required in this Parliament, in this country, and Canadians deserve answers. So, Madam Speaker, I would conclude with that. This is a chance for MPs in this place to take a stand for what's right, to take a stand for accountability, and to ask for the answers that Canadians desperately need. Desperately need. Let's make sure we get those answers for Canadians, because, Madam Speaker, that's the very least and absolutely what every member of Parliament in this place should do. Vote yes to the common sense Conservative motion to demand answers on the Liberal Green slush fund.
Leader of the House.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, it's interesting as the Conservatives try to portray a false image that the government has not been acting. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you take a look at SDTC and the fact that it's an arm's length foundation that's been there for over 20 years now, when the government did discover, in terms of what has taken place, a number of initiatives to rectify the problem were also initiated by the government, which ultimately led to the auditor doing the report that we have today, and the board is no longer in existence as it's in a transition to NRC. And I'm wondering if the member could provide his thoughts on what he believes NRC is going to be able to do in order to keep the program moving forward.
The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, here we have a Liberal member who continually props up the corruption exhibited by that Prime Minister and the government opposite. And their response, it's not demanding answers for Canadians. It's not suggesting that transparency is key. It's not dare criticize the governing prince of his party. But instead, all his response is, don't worry about it, there's nothing to see here, just trust us. Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is this. Canadians deserve better, Canadians deserve answer, and Conservatives are working hard to get it. Now, the question I have for every Liberal backbench member, every member of the New Democratic Party, and every member of the Bloc Québécois, will they stand with Conservatives in demanding the answers that Canadians deserve?
Okay. Questions and comments. The honourable member from Selkirk, Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Battle River Crowfoot for his speech. And, you know, the Liberals here are definitely fighting against having this motion carried, having the production of papers. And I just want to ask them, there's $123 million here that the Auditor General has identified that didn't follow the rules under the conflict of interest declarations, that the SDTC actually continued to use funds to benefit themselves and their friends, and that the Liberals stuffed the board with their colleagues. So we're talking about patronage, we're talking about pork barreling, but is the Liberals voting against this because it's, you know, another Liberal cover-up? Is it Liberal incompetence? Is it Liberal corruption? Or is it Liberal complicity in what could be an RCMP investigation and charges underneath the criminal code? Or is it all of the above?
The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the question that my colleague from Manitoba just asked, because I think it speaks to something that should not be controversial. Simply asking for us to shed light on the circumstances, asking for these documents so that all Canadians can make that judgment for themselves. And if charges should be laid, well, then charges should be laid. If there is further details that need to be examined, then those further details should be examined. What is so disgusting, Mr. Speaker, is that it seems like these Liberals, propped up by the fourth party in the corner there, a weak NDP, they seem to cover up the corruption no matter what the cost. Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. So this motion is simple. This motion is straightforward. And this motion simply asks that we can have the documents so that Canadians can see for themselves where the money in the Liberals' green slush fund went. I think that's common sense, Mr. Speaker. I would ask every member of this House to join in promoting that very common sense idea.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The colleague mentioned us, so I'll be replying. We agree entirely with the basic principle of this motion with respect to transparency, but there's some things that don't work in this. The 14-day delay for the documents, the RCMP, I don't think that's the role of the Parliament. I have some suggestions for my colleague that are constructive, so we can work more on this motion. Perhaps consult other parties if we want it to be adopted. Perhaps what they just want is to have a video clip. But on the basis, in terms of transparency, it's fundamental.
The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot only has about 25 seconds left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll make this quick. When it comes to the motion that we have before us, 14 days is a very reasonable timeline. These documents exist. They can be brought forward and tabled so that Canadians can get the answers that they are entitled to. Because when it comes down to it, the corruption, the scandal, the pork barreling, the conflicts of interest, this is an abuse of institutions that Canadians should be able to trust. So transparency, Mr. Speaker, is very, very key. We've laid out a very straightforward motion that is an important first step in ensuring that Canadians get the answers that they deserve.